Good morning, everybody. I'm Ed Avis. I'm the publisher of El Restaurante magazine, and I want to welcome you to our webinar this morning on local sourcing. It's a hot topic. It's something that we have written about, and we are excited to have with us Jose Salazar from Mitas in Cincinnati. And hopefully, in a few minutes, we'll have also Karyn Tomlinson from Myriel in St. Paul. She's tied up for the moment. But thank you, everyone, for coming. If you have questions during the event, oh, and here's Karyn coming in now. Great. If you have
Hello.
questions, good morning, Karyn. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Oh, we're so glad to see you.
Sorry, I'm a minute late here. I'm excited
That's,
to be here.
that's quite all right. That's quite all right. I was just telling the attendees that we can take questions. And attendees, to do that, please use your Q&A tab on your screen. And you can fire those questions at any point, and we'll either answer them right at that time or at the end of the event. And also keep in mind that we are recording this so that you can watch it later if you'd like to. It'll be posted on the El Restaurante website. So let's go ahead and get started. We have some questions here, and I'm going to take off the screen share so that our participants are focused on instead. Great. So let's start with the first question here. And Jose, maybe you can start. Tell us a little bit about your restaurant and how important local sourcing is to your menu.
Sure. Well, my restaurant Mitas is Spanish and Latin American tapas. And so, when you hear that, you automatically would think, well, we're using exclusively products from Spain and Latin America. But actually, what we're doing is we're taking the concept of tapas and those flavors and combining them with what we have locally available to us. So it's through a Midwestern lens, and we really incorporate the produce that we have available and try to have it mirror those dishes or that style of cuisine. For example, we have a dish going on the menu later this week called calzots. Calzots are a Spanish spring onion, and they grill them over open fire, and they're served over romesco. So we're taking that very same dish, but we're using a product that's grown, a spring onion that's grown here locally. So that's kind of a really good example of how we approach seasonality and local cuisine.
Great, great, thank you. I'm familiar with the calçots because we were in Barcelona in March, and that season had just started, and several restaurants in our neighborhood were serving it. So,
Cool.
Karyn, tell us about that same question for you and Myriel in St. Paul.
Yeah, we at my restaurant, Myriel, we just kind of the way we build our menu sort of is based on what farmers have around us. So we kind of picked a farm area to work with. And this sort of just happened organically. We got to know some of these people and found out the things that they were growing, and then kind of worked backwards from there, using different, cooking techniques. So, I, for example, have a farmer who I'm friends with a farmer who grows kidney beans, and another farmer who grows sorghum. And we use the sorghum syrup in some dishes. And then I asked him to save the tassels. And so we're using the sorghum grains and the beans together in a dish. And, if I were somewhere else in the world and didn't know these people, I probably wouldn't make a kidney bean and sorghum dish. But it's actually a tartine that we have on our menu with these beans and sorghum. So using kind of a French idea, that sort of is my cooking background, but using these ingredients in a delicious way with that vehicle. So that's an example on my menu.
Great.
That
Great.
sounds so interesting.
Thanks.
Great. Well, let's stay with you, Karyn, on the next question. You gave that great example. Can you give us another one or two examples of dishes that are using very local ingredients?
Yeah, another way that we kind of implement this idea is we know all of the farmers that we buy our meat from. So we actually only buy, and I realize this is not possible for many restaurants. We're small and we can do this, but we only buy whole animals. And so we do our own butchery. We use everything. And so that's kind of we've just decided that we love the way that these farmers are raising their animals and we want to work with them. So even if that means not having as many prime cuts on the menu at any given time, we're okay with that because we want to prioritize working with those particular farmers and working with what they have. So that just means a little more creativity on our part in doing more braises or force meats, making some charcuterie sausages to make that work.
Hmm. Well, that sounds complex. I mean, how did you learn that aspect of cooking, the butchery and preparing those meats?
Sorry for the cat interruption
Oh,
here.
that's all right.
um, I I didn't have any formal training really in butchery. I just I way back did go to cooking school briefly, and I think the biggest thing I learned how to break down was a rabbit. um, but everything is kind of like a really big rabbit if you think about it that way. And then I also kind of, I was able to work at a restaurant that was doing whole lamb. And so I learned on lamb, and then I learned on pigs. What learning looked like really was just working with another chef who was more confident than I was in breaking that down. And then, getting creative with how to use, like learning more about different muscles, different parts of the animal, and getting creative with how to use that. And I think there are many different cooking traditions that do much better at that than we in modern America have done. So, kind of digging back into some of those traditions is also a big part of that process.
Now, leaning back into the local aspect, do you think using locally raised animals is better somehow? I mean, is it different from if you bought it from, already cut up meat from some distant farm?
I I don't feel any superiority to I don't feel any, I don't think I'm doing it the right way necessarily. I just have I personally, I think that there's more flexibility for one. It's more affordable if, there's more labor involved. But, if you have people on your team or if you're able to do that, it can be more cost effective. And also, if you find anything wrong, it's one phone call away. You're one phone call away. You know exactly where your meat is from.
Mhm.
And there's also a little bit of back and forth. Like I've had farmers ask me, what did you think about this last hog? I finished it a little bit differently, things like that. And that dialogue just isn't possible if you're working with a larger, if you're sourcing differently. I also think that the freshness, you know exactly how long, when something was slaughtered, how long it's been hanging. There's just a little bit more flexibility in how you can use the different parts of the animal. So if you're able to, I think there certainly are advantages, but you have to be okay with all the limitations that come with that too. There are only so many chop cuts on a pig or,
Yeah, yeah,
so.
yeah. Well, that's great. Jose, how about you? You mentioned the calzots. What is another dish or another example of a locally sourced product you're using?
Well, if we're talking about whole animals, we also get a lot of whole animals. We're a fairly large restaurant at 130 seats, so we do have some limitations on how much we are. So we have to kind of mix and match, if you will. But an example would be we have a local farmer that's raising beautiful goats, and we had a dish, mamela dish, which is a tortilla of sorts, but the sides come up. So it's like this beautiful little cup that holds in all your goodies. And it was a very, very popular dish. And we had to recently just take it off and switch to something else because the goats were gone. So
Mhm.
it's, as Chef mentioned, it's about being adaptable, being flexible,
Yeah.
understanding that, your customers are going to maybe sometimes be a little disappointed in that today we don't have any prime cuts, or today we don't
Yes.
have that dish. And, there's people that would come back specifically for that dish. And so we had our servers have to basically, explain to them. So it is a lot more work. There is a lot more sort
Mhm.
of dialogue that goes into sourcing locally, and having your service team be a part of that conversation as well. So oftentimes I think that's something that's forgotten, is that the customers don't necessarily understand why you took it. I love that dish. Why'd you take it off the menu?
Yes.
Well, we can't source that same product. Could I get goats? Sure, I can get goats, but is it the same goat? No. So I'm not going to sacrifice
Yes.
the integrity of that dish, the flavor of that dish, the the deliciousness of that dish for just a commodity product,
Mhm.
that isn't going to be nearly as good a substitute.
Mhm. Mhm.
Can I just jump in? I love what you said, Chef. And I think, and absolutely having a good front of house team who has buy-in to, they're really excited about, the way that we're sourcing things in restaurants, and they understand the fragility of farming, and communicate that to people. I think that that is so important. I just had a similar thing happen to me with asparagus. I work with one guy who grows beautiful asparagus. That's all he grows. And he called me and he said, "Oh no, my asparagus is coming up crooked and hollow. I have to
No,
put it
no.
on pause for now."
Wow.
And so we shifted gears at the restaurant and had to communicate that to everybody. And now, I mean, it's a happy ending. His asparagus is coming up beautifully again, but and then the season's going to be done. But I think that it's actually a positive. We can be so fearful to kind of make changes for our guests when they get attached to things or feel that we owe them those things, or afraid that maybe we won't be able to make a dish that they're equally excited about that's different. But I think that it actually involves the community, the dining community. It helps them be more connected to where their food is from in a way that actually makes their eating experience, their connecting over food, even better. And whether they know it or not, we can do that.
Excellent. Yeah, great points. The limitations are there, but sometimes limitations lead to new opportunities. So
Yeah.
let's go to another question, and let me remind the attendees: if you have questions, please use the Q&A tab and share those questions with us. Um, Jose, how did you discover the local farmers or suppliers or foragers that you use?
I like how you use the word discovery, because really, I mean, it's work. It entails, years and years and years of building those bonds and relationships. And they're varied. Sometimes the farmers discover us. Sometimes they'll hear, that we have these ethos, and that we have, a respect for what they do, and they'll come to us and they'll say, "Hey, I heard that you're somebody that might want to work with me." So that's great. If you have that reputation, that's kind of like a pat on the back for yourself. You're like, okay, great. They are respectful and honor what we do just as much as we honor what they do. It could be, a guy met someone at a farmer's market. It could be, if just somebody that just shows up at the back door just because, they're looking to sell you a product. I mean, some of these relationships go back, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years. So honestly, I can't even remember where I met some of them, but I just know that we continue to have that dialogue and build upon those relationships. And as Chef Karyn said, you have this this bond where you can sort of dictate to one another what you need and want out of that relationship, and that's, I think, the most important takeaway, is that you work in unison to create a product that is beautiful.
Mhm.
Can you give us maybe an example of that? Like you mentioned the Calcots was that a farmer or who grows these, or a forager, or how did those come into your kitchen?
It's a farmer, so I that's one of those where I specifically asked the farmer to grow these for us because I knew I wanted to put this dish on the menu because the season usually is so short for spring onions. So what he's doing is he's growing them in stages so that hopefully we can extend that season a little bit longer than it normally would. Obviously, the weather is, and that's something that we haven't even touched upon, but Mother Nature is going to really ultimately be the one who decides what you do or don't do and what you can put on your menus. But, in theory, if he's planting the seeds in stages, we will be able to harvest more than just a few weeks and can extend the life of that dish.
Okay. And this particular farmer is someone you've worked with for a while, and you trust him?
Yeah, yes, I trust him. Yes. But, I'd say he's someone I've worked with for about 5 years, and every year our relationship gets a little bit better. We communicate a little bit more, and so I'll say the carrots were a little woody this year, or he'll say to me, these are some things that I think are going to be very successful, and here's some other things that you want that maybe I won't be able to grow with the same level of success. So anyways, that's kind of like having that really the ability to be flexible is ultimately, I think, what it boils down to.
Yeah.
All right. Karyn, same question to you. How did you find the suppliers, the local suppliers that you work with, and tell us a little bit about your relationship with them?
It's a whole variety of ways, really. I also one of my dearest, she's actually become a really good friend of mine, and a farmer that I've worked with for years through a couple different restaurants. That was a cold call, just through the back door of the kitchen, and we got to chatting, and turned out her family was from the town next to where my family came from, and she didn't think anybody knew where it was. It's so small, and so. And then, it's interesting. My grandmother passed away when I was kind of in between two restaurants, and I wanted to do a dinner in her hometown to honor her, and because I was finally had time to do that, and but I thought, I think it's all corn and soybeans where this area is. But I poked around, I asked a couple people, and I ended up getting a list of like 5 names with numbers from somebody I trusted in the area who said, you should talk, check in with these people. I think they might be growing squash, or they might be growing this or this. And this person has a dairy farm, and anyway, so I just called these people out of the blue and learned that there was this incredible kind of underground network of farmers who were bringing back regenerative methods of farming, doing some really cool things. And so my excuse was to do this dinner. And then eventually when I opened my restaurant, they had become my friends at that point. I had started to source some other things from them. And then they would tell me, hey, have you talked with this guy down the road? Or have you talked with her? She's starting to grow strawberries. Or this person is, and so it kind of became this network that has grown. And then, once people kind of found out that we were sourcing things in this area and from farmers like that, we've had people reach out to us who are starting a new farming business, or, I got a call from one retired farmer asking me if I was interested in his spring parsnips this year because he thought maybe we would be. And it was just really sweet. So it continues to grow. You just have to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit. Relationships, I think sourcing food this way feels more vulnerable because it is a relationship. And when there's a name and a face to the person you're buying food from, you can't just be at the last minute like, oh, never mind, I don't want that. Because you realize they grew it for you, or it actually makes a bigger difference to them. And I think it's okay to be exposed to that kind of vulnerability because the return on that is so much greater. And you just have access to cooler things because of it.
That's cool. Now, let's stick with you for this next question, Karyn, because you brought up like this retired farmer calling you. When a farmer talks to you, do they give you the prices, or do you negotiate with them? And in general, is is the cost more or less than you worked with
It is a grab bag. Who knows? I mean, so this guy, I actually, I hate it. I mean, quite often happens where when there are a lot of farmers that we work with who it's not their primary business to supply restaurants. And so like they might have contracts, they might be growing wheat or beans or things like that and selling that to bigger organic contracts, but then they have their own like farmer's garden, or they'll have a cover crop of turnips, and so we get some kind of byproduct from their thing. Or it might be someone who's retired, and then they're kind of like, I don't know, what do you think it's worth? And so then it's really tough because there's no middleman. I have to be, it's hard to feel responsible for coming up with a price. I like to err on the side of generosity though. But also for some retired farmers, they just are excited for their stuff to be used and cover their costs, but they're not looking to make a lot of money. It's fun for them to participate in something. So it just looks a little bit different for everyone. But there are certainly people who already have pricing systems in place. And there are farmers that I work with where we go back and forth a little bit. Like I've bought cows from like retired dairy cows from our dairy farmers to butcher. And that's not a normal thing for people in my community to buy. And so we're both kind of like, I don't know, it makes sense. And so it's a little bit of a back and forth.
What happens to dairy cows when they're retired otherwise?
Well, sometimes they end up in the woods or on the compost, basically nature's compost pile. Or a lot of times farmers will have a farm butcher come out and then they won't even break them down normally. They'll just basically grind all the meat and then give it to the farmer. So it usually stays in farm communities.
Okay. Chef Jose, same question to you. Tell us a little bit about the business side of this type of business.
Yeah, I was laughing really, really hard because it's so true. The farmers sometimes will just say, "What do you want to pay? What do you think is fair?" And it's such a difficult scenario to be in because you certainly don't want to cheat them, and you don't want to insult them. You don't want to say like throw out a price that is ludicrous. But the reality is that it is so. Each farmer has their own system. Each one is. It kind of has their own way of doing business. Yeah, so the sourcing is just so varied. Like every aspect of how we get food from farmers is so different. Some of them are, literally they have a pound of something and they go, "Here, I'm just going to give it to you." Some of them, really have very precise ways of how they approach it. So it's just a little different strokes for different folks kind of thing.
I think you just kind of tagging on with that, just respecting whatever system they're working with and then making sure that it works for you. No one's making you work with any farmer, but, respecting, like I work with a farmer who primarily sells to CSA. He does CSA boxes, and then he'll let me know if he has things left over that there's just not room for in his boxes. And his prices are, like farmers market as CSA prices, which are a little bit higher than wholesale farm prices that I'm used to. And he's aware of that. I'm aware of that, but he's just happy his stuff isn't going to waste. So we kind of meet in the middle a little bit. That's one example of how we work that out.
And Karyn, CSA means can you that's the community.
I don't actually know what CSA. I don't remember what it's. You're like the boxes that people can buy and are delivered to their homes, or pick up, that have like a different set of vegetables every week.
Right. Got it.
Yeah. And then I just want to expand on that a little bit more too, is because another, I think, component is when farmers do have excess, they have a bumper crop. So we'd like to take advantage of that. It's really beneficial for both, right? If a farmer says, "I've got an extra 100 pounds of tomatoes," and maybe they're not the prettiest tomatoes, well, I'll take them. I'm going to can them. I'm going to use them in some form. And you're going to sell them to me at a discounted price, but you're going to make some money off of them. They're not just going to end up, in your compost pile, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I think there's a whole slowly growing market of what they call upcycled food, which
Yeah.
is not attractive pieces of
Hmm.
produce that otherwise don't get sold, but can be used because they're totally nutritious.
Mhm.
Now, Chef Jose, when you, for example, talk to a farmer at the beginning of his growing season, and you say, "Okay, I'm going to want, whatever, 1,000 pounds of carrots this summer," presumably at that point you have discussed price already, or is that not happening?
Yeah, you have a general understanding of what that's going to cost, but there are variables. Like we keep saying, there's so many variables. There's so much flexibility that you need to have, and so maybe there were some challenges around how they grew those carrots, and they no longer feel like that's the price that is it's going to make them a profit, and you have to understand that as Chef Karyn said, it's really just that open dialogue and making sure that you don't feel like anyone isn't really getting their due, right?
Mhm.
So if they're growing this specifically for you, I think you have to understand that you're just as invested financially in a way as they are, right? Like it's suddenly you're now partnered in that the growing of those products.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Great point. Um, Now, do you have a percentage of food cost that you aim for in your restaurant? I mean, is there, when you're preparing your menu, you say, well, I want to keep my food cost at X, Y, Z, and that might help you thus price the produce from the farms?
Yeah, I think kind of industry standard today, which it's kind of the word standard is even a tough thing to say because it's tough. Uh there's so many challenges around the cost of operating a restaurant today. But I'd say 25%. Does that sound about right
Mhm.
for you, Chef?
Yeah.
That's kind of like where we need to be able to offset a lot of the other costs. It used to be years ago, when I first started cooking, it was like 33%. It was like 33% for labor, 33% for food. And I think anything over 25%, you're probably going to have some challenges, staying in the black.
Okay.
Right. Well, and especially, to be honest, I think sometimes sourcing the way that we both source can be more labor intensive. It takes,
Sure.
somebody's got to communicate with all these people. That takes time
Yeah.
and energy.
Oh my God.
Processing things, if a farmer, that person who gives you a pound of something, it might not be in the same condition that, who
Mm,
knows? It usually takes a little bit more work. Certainly butchering animals does. And so some of that percentage has to go to your labor, and which is just high right now in general anyway. I would say that's about what we shoot for, but it doesn't really determine how much for us, I don't think we don't really think about our food cost percentage when we're deciding what to pay our farmers. It more has to do with how much we're charging for things.
I see. On the
Um,
other end.
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, because
No.
we also know it's a huge farmers aren't they're struggling just as much as restaurants are, if not more in some ways. And so, we want to be fair on both parties. I think that's also part of the storytelling that we need to give our guests. These are valuable things. Vegetables are just as valuable as caviar, and we have to, price it accordingly and have good front of house service who can communicate that to people.
Great point.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that the point uh, that you made about time is a good segue to the next question, and that is, what challenges do you think you're facing dealing with these local suppliers that you wouldn't face or that you don't face when you're just calling up, U.S. Foods or Cisco or someone like that? Let me start with you on that one, Chef Karn.
Well, if you asked anyone on my team, their immediate answer would be the time necessary. Like it makes planning really hard sometimes. we've just been talking about this recently, where we get fresh lists, and not this isn't even US Foods or, but so from some of the larger middlemen, or like farm suppliers who they're doing like a farm collective, and they, have a fresh list they send out every week and then deliver to restaurants. Those are, we call our bigger farmers, even though they're still local farmers. They always have their information out by Friday. We put our orders in on Saturday for the next week. But then on Monday, I hear from our smaller farmers, the people who are just getting started, the ones that we really want to prioritize at our restaurant, because we play a role in supporting them as they get established in their business. So, the question is, how do we handle our orders at the end of the week if we want to leave space for these other people? And, or, using asparagus as the example, what if we've decided we're going to commit to Rick clay pots for asparagus this season, and that's it? Well, when Rick's asparagus is curly and hollow and he's not harvesting it, then we have to change our menu on a dime, and so it does take a little bit more. It takes a lot of willingness and buy-in from the team to be able to do that, and understanding both from back of house and front of house. We may not be able to follow our menu change protocols to a T every time if we have to do that quickly. We may not have the luxury of letting our wine steward know that we're going to have a dish changing in a week, or something like that. So, I think that it requires flexibility, a lot of flexibility and time and planning from in the team. But if you have the right team, or, you might not, it takes time to build the right team, I think. But I think once you do, it's totally possible.
Mm-hmm. Chef Jose, same question. What challenges do you face doing it the way you do it with local sourcing as compared to dealing with a distributor or a larger provider?
Chef Karyn, I think, really kind of hit the nail on the head. A lot of what you said is I would echo. I think having a good inkjet printer so you can change your menus on a dime is important. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, everything she said was pretty much spot on.
Okay, all right. We do have a couple follow-up questions here that I've been noting. Freshness. Chef Jose, I think you and I talked about this when I interviewed you for that article, that the produce that you're buying from a farmer is most likely fresher. Can you enhance that a little bit? Why is that?
Well, I mean, I think the obvious thing is it doesn't have to travel very far. So much of what we get in our market today has traveled sometimes thousands of miles. If we're talking asparagus, asparagus is one of those vegetables that I think a lot of people have gotten accustomed to seeing in the market all year round, and it has a very short season, here in the States. But Peru is now growing, I think, I don't know, 80% of the world's asparagus. So if you get asparagus that's been traveling that far, there's no way that it's going to be as delicious and as fresh and vibrant as something that, what's the farmer's name that you're working with?
Rick clay pots. Yeah.
Rick clay pot. You can't compete with Rick clay pot if you're just talking about how far something's had to travel. But the love and attention that went into it, and I mean, I know as a very mediocre gardener, I go out every day and I look at my plants and I see what they're doing, and so I'm sure the big conglomerate farm in Peru isn't doing that. There isn't someone out there paying that much attention to it. So it's inevitable that that asparagus that's grown by Rick is going to be that much more delicious, that much fresher, and it's going to have a lot more longevity. It's going to be able to sit in your cooler for, hopefully you're able to sell it to your guests right away. But if you can't, say you had a couple slow days, it's going to hold up much better than the stuff from Peru.
Right.
Good point. Karyn, anything you'd like to add on that?
No, exactly what Chef Jose said. I mean, it's I also think that there's a certain pride that smaller scale farmers take in what they're growing, especially when they know where it's going to. And I just can't help but think that that translates a little bit. I also just think, and I am so not scientifically minded, so I have
Me
nothing
neither.
really to support what I'm about to say, but I think that there are people who are more scientifically minded than me who would say this, though. So there's got to be something. I think that it's actually like better for us to be eating produce that comes from soil, comes from the environment around us, that the climate around us can support, that the soil around us can support. I think there's just a certain, I mean, it is, I do think it's healthier for us as well. And between the pride and the people who are growing it, who see where it's going, and then the longer shelf life, if in a sense, because it's not starting 5 days earlier when it's harvested and who knows where. Um, all of that, I think, just make, and also I find myself and my team, we value the ingredients so much more and we treat them more specially. We give them more honor in a sense when we know who grew them and how hard it is to grow them and how fickle the season is. And so, all around, from the product actually being better itself, better for us, and then us taking more pride in how we handle it. I just think there's so many benefits to working with food that comes from near you.
That's a quick segue into another follow-up question that we have, and that is organic. Are you working specifically with organic farmers or not? Or is that not an issue?
Well, some of the farmers that we work with are certified organic. But for a lot of them, the certification process is just, I mean, the certification process for true organic farming is really long, doesn't necessarily make sense for every farmer to do that. But all of the farmers that we're working with are using regenerative methods for growing their products. They're being mindful of soil health, they're using the least amount of intervention as possible. I had one guy that we bought a lot of apples from. I buy apples from him for all the pies we make during the winter. And he told me right when I met him, full disclosure, Karyn, he said, we use this spray early on one time in the season, but my filter and what I'm willing to use or not use on my apples is, would I be comfortable giving this to my grandchildren? And I'm like, that works. That makes sense to me. So he's not putting bags on each of his apples. I don't think he could. He's growing on a scale where that's not possible, but he just was really transparent with us in what he was doing. And so that's an example, I guess. It looks a little bit different for all the farmers that we work with, but they're very transparent in what they're doing or not doing, how they're growing things. And so then they kind of leave it up to us if we're comfortable with using their things.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Chef Jose, any thoughts on that? Organic farming versus?
Yeah, yeah, same thing. I think most of the farmers, the small scale farmers, don't want to go through the hoops that they have to go through to become certified organic. Going to visit the farms, which any good chef will go and you get an understanding right away from, or even just talking to the farmer, getting to know them as a person. You get to understand what their ethics are and how they approach farming, and almost immediately whether that's the type of again, do your ethics, do your ethos match right away, and whether they're certified, whatever the label is, I think is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but I just want to chime in really quick because you said something, Chef Jose, about just asking, getting to know your farmers, talking to them, even if you don't have time to go visit every farm. Um, I when I was first kind of getting started in this, I was almost embarrassed for the things that I didn't know about farming. and
Mm-hmm.
but I just want to encourage anybody listening to not be afraid to ask questions. Like, farmers love talking about their work and have opinions on how things should be done. And it's fascinating to listen to them. And I don't think they expect anybody especially if you live in the city, to really totally understand all of that. And so I think it gives them honor to ask them questions. You don't have to worry about looking stupid, but also there are a lot of resources out there. You can spend 5 minutes Googling something, or I guess that's not the thing people do anymore, chat GPT, whatever. You can do some research on how, some of the basics of farming or farming specifics. And that goes a long way to having a good conversation with a farmer.
Great point.
Yeah, some farmers you can't get them to shut up.
I know you open a can of worms. Yeah.
They're out in these fields by themselves, and as soon as they see humans, they go, let me tell you everything.
Yeah.
Chef Jose, let me present this follow-up question to you, because Mita has Latin influences. Obviously, if someone is trying to source ingredients from Central America or South America or Spain, they're not locally grown. And you might have touched on this before, but explain a little bit how you fill your menu needs when it's a Latin dish with ingredients that are local.
Yeah, that's another one that is very varied, and I mean, so I think the biggest, I guess, way to look at it is what doesn't already grow here, right? So olive oil, avocados, limes, those are some examples of ingredients that, we do use, and there's some restaurants that would say we're not going to use limes because they don't, it's just not something that grows in our area, and so they're going to substitute maybe sumac or something else that's going to give acidity to the dish. We certainly don't go that far, but there's a beautiful pepper called ají amarillo. We use it quite a bit, and it comes in a jar. It's an already prepared product. But during pepper season, we push the ají amarillo to the side, and we use the peppers that are available to us, and we'll preserve a lot of them, and we'll freeze some, we'll make hot sauces, we'll ferment, we'll find other ways to extend the life of that pepper so that we're not buying the ají amarillo, quite as often as we would. But so it's a bit of a mix, and there are just some ingredients that I love from those places, and so it's a mix and match. And we try to source the best version of those products. So if it is an ají amarillo paste, it may be a large scale production, but it's one that we feel, it's still doing it the right way. It's a good product, whether it's organic or, whatever label it has. And we don't necessarily know the person who grew those peppers and canned them, but we try to source things that we think still are special products, if you will.
Right. Yeah. You need to be realistic.
Yeah. And again, we have 130 seats, so I think it's a bit of a challenge. My other restaurant, Salazar, which we're reopening, was 40 seats, and it was very much, there was a lot more ability to say, okay, we have this in very limited quantities, and to sustain ourselves on that level. But it's a little bit more challenging the bigger the restaurant.
Right.
And we're busy. Thank God we're busy. So that's another challenge. It's like, we may serve 40 or 50 of one type of dish on any given night.
Yeah, great.
And by you, making, I think really a lot of what this has to do with is choosing what your limitations are. And you get to choose what kind of box you want to draw, and what's in and what's out. And I mean, I love cooking with lemons. We do not grow lemons in Minnesota. Not yet, but a long time ago, I just decided, okay, we're not going to highlight these. We're not going to highlight lemons, but yes, we'll use it in our cocktails. Yes, occasionally we'll use it to season something. lemons transport really well. We can still grow them in the US, and they're going to be one on my short list of exceptions. And, by using some of those things that, like you were talking about, Chef, that also helps you to highlight the ingredients, the very special, very local ingredients that you do have, and not break your neck doing it, by doing all these gymnastics. Rhubarb and sumac just don't do the same things, and so I think that it's there's a time and a place for that, but also, or yeah, refined sugar. That's another thing. We use it. I used to be a pastry chef. It's really hard not to, and but we don't have that here. And so I think that just making peace with some exceptions that will allow you to highlight the truly amazing, beautiful local things, and making that clear to your staff what you're okay with, like that's your prerogative. And I think it shouldn't feel wrong.
Great.
Yeah, I will admit that I do at times feel a little guilty when I'm not, especially, when we're talking about the dead of winter, when I go, man, I wish I could be a little bit more selective, and but there's only so much kale I can serve my guests.
Great. Attendees, let me remind you, we've only got about 10 minutes left. If you have any other questions, fire them away. I've got one more question for our speakers, but if you have questions, use the Q&A tab. And my question is this, and I'll start with you, Chef Jose. And you've covered a lot of this already, but maybe there's something left. What tips would you have for other restaurant chefs or owners who are interested in starting in local sourcing?
Good question. I think the thing is to do it, right? I mean, there's all the benefits that we talked about. One that maybe we didn't fully touch upon is how much it just benefits your community at large, right? Whenever you're keeping dollars within your area, that's a benefit to everybody, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a chef, or just somebody that lives in the community and benefits from the tax revenue or whatever, however you want to look at it. I'm a lot more kind of involved in what happens on a local level than I am on a national level. Not to say that I'm blind to what happens, globally or nationally, but I'm going to be a lot more concerned with how my neighbors are doing than how people in Washington D.C. are doing. So that's probably one thing that is key to remember. But just do it. It is a lot of work, and it can seem overwhelming. But if you start small, maybe this year you're going to focus on. I'm going to try to find tomatoes locally. I'm going to really focus on one product or one aspect of your restaurant. And that would go for people who aren't restaurateurs. I would say, if you're just a home cook, not just, but if you're a home cook who is interested in feeding yourself better and working locally, start small. Go to the farmer's market, explore, and don't feel like you have to, do that every week, but supplement your big box groceries with some farm fresh products, and the same would go for a restaurant. I often think that restaurants are just a scaled up home, right? I tell this to my chefs all the time when I see them cutting a carrot and they leave a half inch at the top, and I go, well, why didn't you use the carrot all the way to the end? Would you do that at home? Would you waste that piece of carrot? No, I wouldn't. So it's almost the same. I'm going on a tangent, but essentially I think just do it, just start, just get involved.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid.
Yep.
Chef Karyn, your thoughts on that topic? Tips?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said, Chef Jose. I I think don't be held back by perfectionism, or intimidated by that. Don't think, you have to eradicate all the lemons in your restaurant if they're not growing in your state, or, you have to, I think, and let yourself be drawn into it because you love it. I think you will. Once you get to know farmers and you have the joy and satisfaction of having them to dine in your restaurant, eating the things that they've grown and that you've made into something beautiful, and your staff are into it and you're into it, like, let yourself be drawn into it because you love it, and do it as much as you can, without feeling guilt about what you can't do. And I just really think that the more you do it, the more you're going to be drawn into it. I, for one, don't feel like I could cook another way at this point in my life. And not because I've become a snob about it, but I just, because I like it. And I just look
Mhm.
at food differently because I see how it's grown and I love the people who grow it. And that's something that I've come to embrace. So I think you'll get hooked if you start to do it more and more, and it doesn't have to be all at once either.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions. So I want to say thank you to both of you so much for your expertise and your participation today. It's been a real pleasure learning from you.
Thanks for your great questions, Ed, and so good to chat with both of you.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
same. It was a pleasure to meet you, Chef.
You too. And I feel like a kindred spirit. I want to visit your place.
Same, absolutely.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. And attendees, thank you for being here. And remember, this has been recorded, so look for it later today. We'll post it or tomorrow morning. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.